Baltic country. It's part of Eastern Europe. It borders Latvia, Belarus. It's strategic. And there's a sliver of property on one of its coasts, and that is part of Russia. And Brian, I'm sure you can explain that to the audience later, the significance of that property there, Kaliningrad, that is Russian property with access to the Baltic Sea. That's right. So in 2002, and I'm just going to give you guys something to think about here for a moment. 2002, Lithuania would do anything to be part of the European Union. Now, what the European Union wanted it to do is forget about its past. Okay, Lithuania, you're part of the future. We want you to kind of forget about your past. And while you're at it, Lithuania, we want you to give up 2 of your nuclear power plants. In 2002, they started the promise to decommission these power plants. You can look it up. It's all details, all factual information on the internet. These 2 plants were decommissioned. They supplied almost 70% of the electricity grid for Lithuania. So that was part of the deal. Give up your electricity grid, become, reliable on the rest of Europe, and we'll give you access to the European Union. They took the deal. But what wasn't reported in the media is after they decommissioned these nuclear power generators, they turned them into, get this, nuclear deposit facilities where other European Union countries like France and Germany could deposit nuclear waste. Isn't that a great deal that you ask a small Eastern European country that so desperately wanted to get into the European Union at that time to give up 70% of their power grid? Fast forward today, 2022, where Germany is reopening some of their nuclear facilities. And what do you get in return? You get to be a nice storage facility for all that nuclear waste in Europe. And this really showed me that there is much more going on behind the scenes here than we are given by our media. And it's guys like Brian and, AJ as well, and myself that, this kind of stuff, when you read it, at first you think it's impossible for this to happen. But more of these doors are opening that is revealing the real nasty stuff that's going on behind here. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy at all, but every day now that where I'm digging deeper into these stories, digging deeper into what really happened in these nations, I just wonder, this is for Brian and AJ, how long have we been lied for? How many generations are we being lied for? That is the question that I would like to know. When did this start? Gentlemen.
I think we've always been lied to, Alex. I mean, ever since I can remember. I mean, you're talking about the Vietnam War, the Korean War, every single war that has been involved, we've been involved in. It's all lies. I remember the times when United States said that we need to go into Vietnam because if we don't, communism will rule the world, and communism will take over the world, and blah blah blah. All these ridiculous lies, and guess what? When America pulled out, did communism rule the world? Did they move on to the into the United States soil? It didn't. So, you go back in history, Iraq War, and I think even way before our times, it's all been lies. I think I woke up in the Iraq War, especially the second one, and I can understand the first one where they had to go in and liberate Kuwait and stuff like that. And I was quite young then. I think I was about 8-9 years old. So I believed in it. And then the second Iraq War, I just couldn't understand why they want to go back in there. And all these ridiculous stories about, weapons of mass destruction. And you had that Kuwaiti girl who completely lied on oath and said there were babies being taken out of incubators. Nobody actually questioned her. Nobody checked who she was. She was the ambassador's daughter. And it's just lies after lies. Then you have Colin Powell, and Colin Powell was at the time he was called the white dove of the administration. And I remember, Bush was so stupid in many ways. He couldn't even put two sentences together. But then you had Colin
Mhm.
Powell, and everybody knew Colin Powell was respected. They called him the White Dove, and they used him. They used him to lie in front of the United Nations with this vial of washing powder, saying this could this could destroy the world. This, oh my God, and completely ruined his reputation. Go on, guys.
Before I forget, Brian, Kaliningrad. Do you have much thoughts on that?
But it's out there. It's it's not directly connected to the rest of Russian territory. So this is
Right, but
a vulnerability that NATO is always going to try to exploit.
It's sitting right there in the Baltic Sea, ready to go, isn't it? I mean, isn't that something that could really play a strategic part in the next few months? Or that's just I see it sitting there. I don't know if the a lot of the people watching this program, maybe AJ or somebody, can bring up a map, but I found it really remarkable. If people are wondering why I'm talking about Lithuania, my wife's Lithuanian, so I've been down to that part in Lithuania, and wow, I mean, you just drive down the road, and all of a sudden you see the Russian border patrols there, the flags waving. This is territory of Russia. I mean. There's an interesting comment by Rolf there. Kaliningrad is a fortress, massive defenses. I mean, thoughts on that, Brian? I mean, could something like that be important? If there's some issues with Belarus as well, there's a buildup of soldiers. You know what we're talking about here, and this is the kind of stuff that I was really excited to get you on the show to pick your brain about. This kind of stuff. I mean, Russians are adding 9,000 troops to Belarus. That was my last understanding. But Kaliningrad, they must have something going on there.
Well, with Kaliningrad, I don't know if people remember, but earlier on, I forget which one of those countries, maybe Lithuania, did it, but they cut overland. Certain goods were not allowed to pass through.
Lithuania, and my wife and I don't condone what the behavior of the Lithuanian government's doing. That is for certain, guys. So don't. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
But that was kind of a very heightened time of tensions between Russia and the West, and it seemed like they kind of backed down on that. Not Russia, the West kind of backed down on that. They were saying, well, no, that government was just doing that on their own. We didn't tell them to do that. The EU was saying that. So it's a difficult topic, but there's no disputing that Kaliningrad is Russian, and I think going after Kaliningrad would be the same as just going after universally recognized Russian territory. It would be a huge mistake, and you would be handing the Russian government, a blank check. Essentially, everyone in Russia would unite around that, and I think NATO is thinking about these things, not because we've pushed these buttons before in history. You don't want to do that with Russia. So. I would imagine that they have built significant defenses there. They have all kinds of plans and contingencies. This is something they've been thinking about long before this began in late February. Something else you said, Alex, was about how they never rebuilt Yugoslavia. And they haven't rebuilt any of the places they've destroyed. Look at Afghanistan. They put trillions of dollars into Afghanistan. They didn't rebuild anything. It was a huge con. That's all it was. And for people now who claim that they support Ukraine, watching the country get dismembered because of this conflict and cheering it on, encouraging them to fight on, the United States is not going to rebuild Ukraine. They haven't rebuilt anything anywhere that they've ruined, whether it was them invading or some proxy conflict that they were behind. They're not even rebuilding basic infrastructure in the United States. The country is rotting out from under the American people. So they're not going to rebuild Ukraine. That's very important for people to understand. And prospective clients of the United States in the future, say the administration in Taipei, think very carefully before you do business with the United States, because they will break it and they will not buy it. They will leave it broken. And that'll be something you have to live with indefinitely. So it's very important for people to keep that in mind.
I remember when Lithuania did block Russian access to Kaliningrad, and I actually thought Russia would make a land bridge from Belarus going all the way to Kaliningrad. And it's their right to do so, because if you block access to their own land, they have every means possible to make sure they have access to it. And there is no way NATO would have got involved, because this is something Lithuania had instigated themselves. Don't you think, Brian and Alex?
Hard to say, because if it was something Lithuania was put up to, of course NATO was planning on the legal, political, and media plan to get behind that and use that as a pretext. So we always have to be careful, because we've seen what the West has done. We've seen what they've been doing in Syria, before that Iraq, Libya. So the sky is the limit.
Yeah, you've got to also understand the little bit of the history, not too far back, but let's go back to the millennium there with Lithuania, a country that was getting on its feet. Things were moving forward. Bush just rolled through town making promises that if anyone ever touched Lithuania, America would be there. Great propaganda. It's true. He stood in the city center there in Pilis Gatvi. That's the main city center there in Vilnius, Lithuania. Yep. And he made a promise. Now, this is a NATO country, but it thinks short term. It's had a drastic decline in its economy, even before the pandemic was ripping through there. It's a country that, in some sense, is rather confused. It's lost a quarter of its population since becoming a member of the European Union. Some of them went to the United Kingdom. Some of them went to, I think even Ireland, and many other choices, because they had 26 or 27 other countries to choose from with the freedom of movement of people. But here's where they run into a problem. Their government is not governing the country with common sense. When you pick a fight with China and you hurt your local businesses like it did nonstop overnight, when they decided that, maybe we should be interested in recognizing, an office in the capital city. Well, that was the biggest mistake that they could have ever done, identifying and accepting Taiwan to have an office representation in Vilnius. Well, overnight, they learned a very, very valuable lesson that no, you have to honor the United Nations. I think it's Resolution 2758, that there is only one China. But they didn't, and they still are sticking to their guns on this one, as their exporters who love to export items to China get obliterated. And as well, they find that their import or customs codes have been pretty much erased from the system. So when you are putting your economy at risk, you're putting your local businesses against the wall, and now you're taking a stance on trying to act like an intermediary between Kaliningrad and its sovereign territory. You're going to get blasted. And financially, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm pretty certain that the same thing that's happened to a majority of the European Union countries, the Zelensky curse, is coming to Lithuania. I can just imagine that in a short time, that government is also going to be replaced or voted out. That's my opinion.
Yeah, just to carry on from what you said, Alex, those of you who don't know, Lithuania used to be part of the 17+1 international group, where there was a direct link coming from China going all the way to the Baltic states via BRI, train links. And Lithuania decided to step out of that and cut all links with China. And they decided to add a Lithuanian embassy in Taiwan and vice versa. But if you look at it in a business sense, there is no way any Taiwanese goods can come to Lithuania, because it can't use the BRI, it can't use the Chinese BRI. And if you have to take it via ships, you have to sail all around the world. And we're talking about going through the Suez Canal, go all the way around Europe, because Lithuania is the northern part of the northern, obviously the north part of Europe. And imagine the shipping costs that would be. It is almost impossible in terms of shipping costs. There's no way economically that would be viable. And secondly, Lithuania, for example, China has obviously blacklisted anything Lithuanian, and I believe there was a German car company which used to use tires coming from Lithuania, and China said nope, we're not going to use that. Get another supplier, and overnight every single item that was coming from Lithuania stopped coming to China. Not only coming to China, but also stopped coming into Europe, because, as you know, German companies have got very, very major business pact with China. All the German cars have factories in China. Any small part coming from Lithuania, China would immediately say no, and Germans would be forced to use another part from another country or make it themselves. So imagine the economic impact on Lithuania. And I can understand Lithuania being, having some sort of issue with Russia because of the past. But why have issues with China? It doesn't make sense.
And I can comment on this, and I'm going to pass it to Brian because I just want to get it off my chest here. I see comments about them being stubborn. Yeah, they are stubborn. They're incredibly nice people, but this little country has had its government replaced so many times, but they have been brainwashed, guys. They have been hit so hard with the Western media when they were tooting the horns about them coming, you're part of the European Union. The sideshows came to town. The Bushes came to town. They said, this is great. You guys are NATO. You got to remember, they felt that they were going from, zero to hero overnight. And it looked like that. The euphoria of being in that country when it became part of the European Union, everyone saw their wealth increase and prices, and they thought they could never do wrong. Well, here is the day when you get a crazy government in there, and it's hard for me to talk about this country like this. I like Lithuania. I mean, my wife's from there. It's a beautiful country, but politically, what an absolute mess. The government is definitely not working for the people. It's working for the man, and that man is Uncle Sam and the U.S. government and the collective West. They've got Lithuania right where they want them. They wanted a little thorn in there to make a mess. They got it, and they got it with Ukraine. Brian, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's pretty much the exact same point I was going to make. The Lithuanian government is not Lithuanian. It doesn't answer to the Lithuanian people or the best interests of the country. It answers to Washington. It was installed into power by Washington. All of these Eastern European countries, they have had regimes installed, just like Ukraine in 2014. And we always hear the story that Russia is upset because these nations are picking NATO and the EU over Russia. No, they're not. They have governments in power that want the best of both worlds. They want a relationship with Russia and the West, but that is not allowed. So they overthrow that government, just like in Ukraine in 2014, and they install a client regime that will irrationally, these are people, again, fanatics, they will irrationally cut all ties with Russia, destroy their economy, and sign up for whatever Washington tells them. And then the process starts, the brainwashing. They take over the media. The U.S. pumps millions. Victoria Nuland said billions were pumped into Ukraine to reshape its political system after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They take over the media. They start maneuvering opposition groups into power. The media starts working on the people. They infest the education system. They start rewriting history books. That's not just in Eastern Europe. That is what they're doing in Taiwan right now. This is what they're doing here in Southeast Asia. The U.S.-backed opposition here in Thailand. They're trying to rewrite history, and their hallmark is being anti-China, irrationally anti-China. It's Thailand's most important trade partner, an increasingly important security partner. In all kinds of ways, you can tangibly see the relationship between China and Thailand benefiting the people. But these U.S.-backed opposition parties and leaders, they will literally come out and say, we're going to cancel the high-speed train with China. Why would you do that Why would you do that? Because Washington told them to, and because it would hurt China, and it would damage all of Asia, because the U.S. doesn't want any competitors. They want everyone subjugated to them. And the only way, if you are a small percentage of the global population and you're trying to subjugate the rest of the world, the only way you can do it is just by knocking everything over, destroying everything, not allowing people to develop. That is the hallmark. And if you look at Eastern Europe, isn't that what has happened?
Yeah, it's an interesting, Brian. And AJ, do you want me to wait to answer to that? Or?
No. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, Brian, I mean, we are sharing a very common thought here. When I arrived in Lithuania over a couple of decades ago, you used to see UN buses, white and black, riding on the sides of buses in Lithuania. The UN was there. The NGOs are all over that place. Okay. And I already started to have really my doubts about these organizations. You would meet these people in the center of Lithuania, Vilnius. Hi, how are you? Good. What do you do here? Well, I belong to an NGO. Oh, okay. Yeah, they pay really well, and you're wondering, hundreds of Americans there. And it's strange because after that bunch of traveling, I lived in Thailand for 6 or 7 years as well. And you will love this story, Brian. I lived in a pretty nice condo called the River Condo near the Chao Phraya, near one of the shopping malls. And at that time, I had a New Year's party. And at the New Year's party, I had a lot of Americans. And I'm not picking on Americans here, but I need to use this as a prime example to really support what Brian is saying here. Sitting in my New Year's party, I had a few people come, and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" "Well, I work for the United Nations." Another girl said that she worked for UNICEF. And I said, "Well, that's interesting." I said, "I remember collecting money for UNICEF when I was a young kid. Those little UNICEF boxes. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but you get a few pennies and some coins in there, and you'd hand them in there." Well, she said to me, "Well, thanks for paying for my first class ticket." Can you imagine that? Saying that to somebody who thought that that these organizations were actually out to actually help people, and it's riddled Thailand. I tell you, Brian, I've seen so many NGOs roll through that place. It's incredible, and it's toxic. And the salaries that they're making there. They're living the high life, spreading a bunch of BS and really trying to destabilize. I seen it in Thailand. It's everywhere. I mean, it's absolutely everywhere. You think that this would be a country of people that are just enjoying themselves as backpackers, but hell no. There are a lot of Americans running around that city as NGOs. I mean, any cleanup happening, Brian?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there is. There was an NGO draft NGO law that was supposed to. They're doing it maybe slowly, so slowly that if you increase the heat slowly enough, nobody really notices. They don't want to create any kind of major row with the U.S. That this is how Thailand has always done business. But just your point about seeing these UN buses and these NGO vehicles. When I travel to Laos many years ago, that's all you would see is these NGO SUVs driving around on dirt roads in the capital. It's the capital city, but they've got dirt roads. And if Laos did not have a relationship with China, and if China was not rising, and if it did not have a good relationship with Thailand and Vietnam, and if it only depended on the West and these fake NGOs, they would be impoverished indefinitely because they don't build anything. They're keeping it that way on purpose. They're keeping them dependent on handouts and keeping them underdeveloped on purpose. There were banners across the road in Vientiane, the capital, that said, turn off your lights, don't keep your lights on at night, use less electricity. They're impeding development on purpose for precisely the reason I said, for the U.S. to dominate. China putting that high-speed rail line through Laos, that has changed the face of the country. And even before that, China was building highways. Thailand and Vietnam were investing. That progress is what's lifting Laos out. And these these NGOs really have no role to play in all of that because they don't do anything. They impede anything happening.
That's right, Brian. I was looking at some of the trade figures as well, and it doesn't really matter how much the train line has cost between China, I believe the city of Kunming, all the way to the capital
Yes.
of Laos. And I was looking at the trade figures, and the GDP figures of Kunming have shot through the roof. I think they've doubled. The city has doubled in terms of GDP and trade with Laos. And the Laos capital, its GDP has almost tripled since a couple of years ago. And these are amazing figures, and you can just the amount of trade and volume of goods are traveling between the countries, and Laos is just really developing fast. I think that was the missing link that Laos was missing all of these years. Suddenly the country is just developing because you have all these Chinese companies now moving into Laos and setting up factories because it's obviously cheaper to set up factories in Laos. Now you have a trade link. There's a lot of mining goods going back and forth. The trade between China and Laos is unbelievable. And however much that train line has cost, I believe they've already recouped that in many ways. And the funny thing is, Brian, I remember listening to one of your videos, and you mentioned an opposition party leader in Thailand who wanted to push for hyperloops or something, and then get rid of the high speed rail lines and put something in place that doesn't even exist. It doesn't exist in the United States, anywhere in the world. It's not even a proven technology, and it's not even a technology that really exists. And he was going around trying to sell the hyperloop. It's like talking about jump before you can walk. I mean, I just thought that was absolutely hilarious. In many ways.
He's a billionaire. He works with another billionaire, both completely backed by the U.S. These mobs they've got out in the streets, these are all either openly, well, I wouldn't say openly because they'll constantly lie about it, but members of these NGOs are also protest leaders. They promote it. They have a huge media presence because Thailand is over dependent on US-based social media networks, which rigged the system here in Thailand specifically to shape the political landscape, the information space. And yes, he went to the United States. He was campaigning for office in 2019. And part of his campaign was going to the United States, talking to, because he was using a lobbyist and they had to do a FARA disclosure. You could see the list of USA, the State Department, all of these very shady regime change organizations. And now he is the beneficiary of US regime change organizations propping up his protests. And he visited the Hyperloop test track in Nevada. It's like 500 meters long. It's not even a real full working article of what Hyperloop was supposed to be. And then he came back to Thailand and he was literally doing PowerPoints saying, we need this. He even said this, and in some of my videos about this, I even have the clip where he's like, we need to rebalance away from China back to the United States and Europe and Japan. I mean, verbatim, what the U.S. State Department's talking points are. He met with U.S. State Department representatives when he was in the U.S. before he made this speech. It's so transparent. They do the exact same thing over and over again. Doesn't matter what country. If there's a protest, just follow the money. Find out who the leaders are, what the name of the organizations are, and do a search with National Endowment for Democracy, USAID. And if it pops up, then that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a color revolution. They'll have all kinds of fancy sayings, prey on people's ignorance of a particular situation. And at face value, it looks like something you should get behind. But of course, it's not. It's the exact opposite of what it portrays itself as. So this, yeah. And we were talking about Ukraine and how it's being destroyed because it's being used as a proxy by the United States. This is what they're trying to do to all of Southeast Asia. They want to overthrow the China-friendly governments here and change the China-friendly population, because another key aspect of these protests is encouraging extremely anti-China points of view and using Western propaganda to put these ideas into people's heads. The Uyghur genocide, there was an NED-funded fake Uyghur NGO run by a white woman, by the way, an American white woman. And she came to Thailand and she's lecturing Thai students about how the horrible Chinese government is genociding the Uyghurs, which is a complete fabrication. It is like WMDs. It's just deliberately, completely fabricated. And this is what they're doing to the population to turn them anti-Chinese, even though that is definitely not in the best interest of the region. I mean, Southeast Asia is thriving because of China is rising, everyone is rising with them. These are countries that have relationships that go back centuries. This is not in your best interest to pick a fight with China. It's only in Washington's best interest. That is very important to point this out.
Exactly. We'll move on to China in a bit, but let's finish off with Ukraine. I wanted to ask you the fact that obviously we know who's behind the Nord Stream 2, and the Polish ex-minister recently obviously tweeted that thank you USA. I mean, we all know that, and he got removed. But what I didn't know, which I only found out a few days ago, that his wife sits at the board of the NED, and I did not know that. And it just goes to show that he must have had some sort of inside information from the National Endowment of Democracy, and whether they had something to do with it. But that's not the question. The question is, obviously, we've seen the images of Russia blowing up Ukraine's infrastructure and stuff like that. And this is just a hunch, really. I mean, the blowing up of the Crimean Bridge was one thing. But then after that, I looked at Twitter and I saw hundreds and thousands of images of people taking selfies in front of this postage stamp thing in Ukraine and smiling and celebrating. And I'm not talking about hundreds here, I'm talking about thousands. And Twitter was trending. It was retweeted like millions of times. And I'm just thinking, was that the trigger? And Russia said, you know what, screw it. Let's just, we've been holding back against Ukraine. These people do not care about us. These people are just humiliating us, completely brainwashed. Let's just go for it and start, blowing up their infrastructure. Do you think that was the trigger, and they're going to go further with it?
Maybe sort of. What you can see going on is this whole operation that Russia has begun. This is going in phases. They have different phases. There's different things that if they can, they would really like to accomplish it during the phase. But if not, then they have to escalate. And so, yes, most definitely, they were going to have to escalate anyway. But attacking the Crimean Bridge, that just gave them actually an obligation to retaliate. And they most likely had this planned. They were going to begin it anyway. And like I said, Ukraine doesn't do anything in their own best interest. They are doing things that are so counterproductive and self-destructive that, yeah, so you blew up this bridge. It's civilian infrastructure. You can say that it has a military purpose, but you could say that about all infrastructure in Ukraine. So you just made it that much easier for Russia to justify hitting these power plants and anything else, any other type of infrastructure. So they're painting themselves into this corner because they won't stop, and they won't stop because they're not thinking about what's in their best interest. They're being encouraged by Washington, and the people in Kiev really don't care what happens to Ukraine anyway.
So I have a question for Alex. So obviously we know that the Russian troops have, there's about 300,000 Russian troops who have been called and been sent to Ukraine. What do you think is the next step? Do you think they're going to march all the way to Odessa and go all the way to Transnistria and get Transnistria joined with its motherland? Or are we seeing that happening slowly, or do you think that they're going to stay as they are and just defend what they have? What do you think, Alex? And we'll go to Brian afterwards.
Sure. I mean, visiting Transnistria 4 times in the last decade, more to try to understand how that country works. Don't worry about my camera. It's just clicked off here. But you have to understand that this area has always supported Russia, since the late 80s, early 1990s. So really, we have a small sliver of land that needs to connect with Odessa down. Do I think they're going to do this over the winter? I'm going to share what Brian's vision is here. I think they're going to dig in deep. What is the rush? What is the real rush to really get that territory? Now, maybe I haven't listened to the latest of your, maybe things have changed this morning, Brian, but my understanding is, they're organizing, They're getting all their ducks in line, as we can call it, and they're taking their time. I don't really see that there is a need for, a massive offensive, but I do see that the Ukraine is definitely going to have to justify a lot of the money that is going into the country. And as Brian has always said, and never ever left this comment, is it's not Ukraine that's making the decisions here. It's the Congress in the United States. It's the senators that are connected to military companies. These are the guys that are calling the shots. And it is, hey, Alinsky, show us some little love so that we can write some more checks to fund this bizarre mission that you're going to lose. You got to remember that Ukraine continues to bomb what used to be part of its territory. When they're sending rockets into the Donetsk and the Luhansk area, that used to be a territory that got along with the rest of the country. When I hear Zelensky say, well, we're going to fight until we get every last little bit back, you're the same asshole that supported shutting pensions off to that part of the country since 2014. You're the same jerk that supported blowing up the Donetsk airport. So what are you talking about that you really care about the rest of the country when you're sending rockets over there at the same time? It's like Canada would be shelling Quebec, and our prime minister saying, well, we really want Canada to be unified again. Well, they blow up the infrastructure. These guys are maniacs. They got their perfect puppet master in there. Alinsky, he's fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And well, you know what? America loves it because the checks continue to keep being written into the billions. I don't know, Brian, how am I doing on this analyzing of this?
Well, yeah, a lot of people say Ukraine has to show something. They have to do something to show for all of this money. But you have to remember, this is a proxy war. So the people sponsoring this proxy war, they want it to keep going. They're trying to overextend Russia. This is what they have written in their own policy papers. That is the purpose of this. And it's also to incrementally encircle, contain, divide, and destroy Russia itself. That is the whole purpose of all of this. So that it's not like the people sponsoring this need any additional motivation to continue doing it. The problem is there are limitations to how long they can do this, and Russia is planning on outlasting them. You watch Ukraine trying to take Kherson City, and a lot of people will debate, is Russia going to hold the city? Will they be forced to leave it? It doesn't matter, because no matter what, Ukraine is going to be losing most of its army trying to do this. They lose brigades worth now between Kherson and Kharkov. They've been losing brigades worth of men. And if you're looking at the numbers, even according to the Ukrainian government, these are huge losses of men every month. They cannot continue doing this. Worse than that, well, yeah, losing human life, there's nothing worse than that. But in terms of fighting capacity, they're losing heavy equipment. You cannot get, once you run out of it, you're not getting any more of it, not anytime soon. And this is the situation Ukraine is in. They're scraping together whatever tanks they have left. They're even talking about, where are we going to get more tanks from? Because there's no more Eastern Bloc countries, former Eastern Bloc countries, that have Soviet era tanks that they can send Ukraine, that they're able to use. Western main battle tanks are not. It's impractical to use them. Even if you had the time to train them and everything, it's still impractical for many reasons that I've talked about. Just basic things like ammunition, artillery ammunition, small arms ammunition. All of these things are dwindling. And you look at the packages the West is sending Ukraine, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And as that is happening, and now we're looking at this next phase of fighting, Russia is bringing together 300,000. They're not conscripts that were yanked off the streets. These are men with a military background, maybe not combat experience, but they have experience in the military. And there's going to be equipment that goes along with them. 300,000, and all of that equipment is going to reinforce Russian forces on the front line already. What does Ukraine have that they can reinforce their front lines with? This is, I said it over and over again, this is not a turning point for Ukraine. These offensives that they launched were an all or nothing affair where they threw absolutely everything they had at where they thought Russian lines were weak, or where, because of political reasons, they felt they had to, because Kherson is far from a Russian weak point. But they're throwing everything they have at these points, and possibly other offensives with whatever they've got left. When that's over, what are they going to have to replace all these losses with? Even the Washington Post. Oh no, go ahead. I can go on.
No, I was gonna. You finished, and I'll go ahead. You mentioned something about the Washington Post.
Sure. The Western media, the Washington Post and New York Times, they've all taken turns writing articles about the horrific losses Ukraine is suffering, and they themselves admit when Ukraine pushes, they lose huge amounts of men and equipment. Russian forces are not standing and fighting. If they risk losing large numbers of troops, or they risk being encircled and captured, they just fall back, and they preserve the lives of their men. They preserve the majority of their equipment. And as they fall back and Ukraine is following them, Ukrainian forces are following them, Ukrainian forces are being decimated. They're driving tanks out in open fields, subjecting themselves to the summation of Russian artillery, rocket fire, missiles, military aviation in that area. It's suicidal, and it is not sustainable. So when they are done with these offensives, they're going to find themselves overextended, thinned out, and without reinforcements, without heavy equipment to replace what they've lost. And Russia will have preserved their men and their machines, plus they're bringing in 300,000 more troops. So, but I mean, it doesn't take a military expert to figure out how that's going to unfold.
Yes, Brian, I was going to add to that as well. Completely agree with you guys. And I've heard yesterday that the United States is pushing through a bill worth 500 or 50 billion, I believe, or 500
Yeah,
million.
I
No,
think
50,
that's what,
no,
right?
50 billion, yeah. And also Ursula 2 days ago has said that she's going to provide 1.5 billion per month to Ukraine as well. So first of all, what power does Ursula have to give away European funds to Ukraine? First of all, she's not even elected by the people. Secondly, while the Europeans right now are suffering with lack of food, lack of heat, she's sending European money all the way to Ukraine without any referendum, without any votes. And secondly, what I was going to talk about is obviously you mentioned about all of these lives that Ukraine's losing. I mean, don't forget the amount of people that are leaving Ukraine. I mean, you have women and children leaving Ukraine. They're not going to come back. I mean, there's stories in UK every single day how Ukrainian women are getting off with British men and getting married and settling down here. And I can imagine it's probably the same all over Europe. And when women, young single Ukrainian women go to another country, they're not going to come back. They'll find someone else and they'll settle down. And these kids will go to school. They'll grow up. They'll have boyfriends, girlfriends, and they'll settle down in another group. What is the point of going back to Ukraine when you see it completely destroyed? And there's figures around. There's ridiculous figures how many people, refugees, are leaving Ukraine every single day, and what will be left of Ukraine? There's no businesses there. If you can't run a business because all of your trade links are completely cut off, and once Odessa goes, and that's it, you cannot trade through the sea anymore. You'll be completely stuck. And and like you said, Alex, all Russia has to do is just sit down and wait. See, if you have these soldiers just protecting what they have, they can just wait until Ukraine just completely collapses, and they will collapse because Russia's got no problem. They're happily selling oil and gas to China, to India, and the rest of the Southeast Asian countries. They don't, they have still money coming in. They don't care about Western sanctions. But where is Ukraine getting money from? I mean, Ukraine is only getting money from handouts, and like you said, Brian, it's getting less and less and less. And we're not even sure if this 50 50 billion will even pass Congress. I know they're trying to push it through before the midterms because this is the only time they can do it, because after the midterms they can't push anything through because it's going to be very difficult for them. What are your thoughts, guys? I mean, I think Ukraine is completely destroyed, and all they have to do is sit and wait. And once Ukraine collapses, Russia can pretty much go in and put any government in there as they can. Ukraine will probably be split between East Ukraine and West Ukraine, a rump state somewhere, maybe somewhere in the middle. What's your thoughts, Brian and Alex? I'll start with you, Brian, and we'll go to Alex.
Well, you can keep sending or finding all of this money, but what are you going to buy once all of the supplies, the equipment, the heavy weapons, the ammunition, once it's all gone, you have to physically make more. It doesn't matter how much money you have, and that takes time to do that they don't have. They simply don't have the time, and that goes for everything else. And when you're looking at the energy crisis that is developing, you're talking about factories, the price of doing business skyrocketing or being so high that you simply can't keep producing. So you're going to shutter your business. And an economy, although many in the West seem to have forgotten this, it revolves around actual, real, tangible things. It revolves around actually making something. And they're painting themselves into a corner where they're not going to be able to do this. They're going to be out of the things that they need. They don't seem like they've planned this thing out the whole way. Now, I want to continue having this conversation, but I just need like a real quick intermission. I will be right back.
Sure.
Alex?
We'll move on to Alex, then we'll
Sure.
carry on with you.
Sure,
So,
sure.
Alex, what do you
Right.
think? How long do you think Ukraine has got? How long do you think Zelensky has got?
Well, let's back up here. We're talking about Ursula. Ursula is not paid to care. You know, she's paid to scare. And that is her role. She's there to say, we understand the fear. We stand behind Ukraine. No, you don't, lady. You don't. Let's be honest. That country has gone down the same line as Libya. Now, what's going to happen to Ukraine? What are they going to do? How are they going to rebuild? They're not going to rebuild. If you think that the European Union money by an unelected figure like Ursula von der Crazy is not going to get their money back, oh, they will. But they will at the expense of every single tangible asset above the ground in the Ukraine and below the ground in the Ukraine. You bet they're going to get their money back, whether it's a pipeline, whether it's a logistical railway that is maybe damaged for the moment, power plants, airports, the next future generations' tax base. America will get their money back somehow, some way. How are they going to get out of this mess? They're not. When people think that this war can end next week or 1 month and everything's going to be great, no, it's not. Ukraine's gone. It's gone. It's finished. It's over. That's the whole game plan here, everyone. It's not to help the yellow and blue flag, you know, that the rest of the world thinks is being bullied by big bad Russia. No, no, no. This has been going on for a long time. You just had to listen to that leaked call that we had on the program yesterday. America put the government in there. I'm still waiting for that election from Yanukovych that took place. Oh, it didn't. That's right, because the American government put the government in there. And then they got the candy man, Poroshenko, to take over and babysit the country, and so he could still sell his candies and make cash. The assets are gone, guys. It's finished. Ukraine has been asset stripped. It's like a debt trap. It's over. So that's how they're going to get their money back, whether it's mineral rights, whether it's oil and gas rights, whether it's commission for pumping oil and gas from Russia. When they open the lines again, they will, because there's a saying: you can walk the soil of Ukraine, you can walk it on the top, but you scratch below the surface. Those are Soviet and those are Russian pipelines that are right underneath that ground. And Ukraine was happy to take lots of money for decades and decades and decades. Well, they've just signed the deal with the devil, and they've just signed the deal with the devil's wife, Ursula. Like I said, she's not there to care. She's there to scare. Brian, over to you.
Yeah. I mean, again, we were talking about Lithuania. We were talking about Ukraine being a client regime of U.S. interests, and following the dictates of Washington at the cost of the Ukrainian people. The EU, I mean, that's just a small microcosm of what the whole EU is. These are bureaucrats who have been installed by the same circle of special interest corporations, financial institutions. They put all of these people into power in Europe, not to represent Europe's best interests or those of the European people. That is self-evident. I mean, you just look and see they're not doing anything that is in the interests of the people. I forget which German politician said she doesn't care about the German people, where she's going to continue supporting Ukraine, which is it in a nutshell. She's doing what Washington is telling her to do. She doesn't care what the cost is for Germany. She doesn't work for the German people. And so we're going to watch Ukraine destroyed. We're going to watch Europe follow it. This is how this whole thing works. That's how empire works. It is a process of extraction. They're not investing in anything. This is extraction. And so, I mean, if we're trying to figure out how long is Ukraine going to last, how long is the EU, I mean, it's impossible to tell. But this is a huge, just like I think you were saying, Alex, I just caught part of it. This is going to be this is a catastrophe, and this is a catastrophe with ramifications that will reverberate for years and years to come. This is not going to be over anytime soon. Yes,
Okay.
Bearbach. Yeah, someone in the comment section.
We'll talk a bit about Europe in a second. I just want to answer this super chat from Elena Diaz. Do you think Russia will deliver gas via NS2? No, because NS2 is destroyed, and as long as the German government stay as they are, puppets of the United States, they will not allow that to happen. So going back to Europe, I mean, we've seen UK, how UK pound is falling, the inflation is going through the roof. I mean, things are really bad in UK, guys. I mean, 10%, 11% inflation, what the government sends out, that's not the real figure. I mean, I just have to go to the supermarket and find out, everything that was costing what it is now. Last year, exactly this time last year, it was about 50% less or 100% less, like butter, basic necessities. Butter's doubled in price in a year. Everything has almost doubled or even gone up 50%, 60%, 70%. People's bills have gone up 4 times. Interest rates have risen. People have to pay extra £400 or £500 a month. Britain is absolutely screwed, pardon my language, and people are going to start losing their homes in the next few months. And you've seen the circus that is happening with the UK government. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've cancelled my Netflix subscription because there's so much drama happening in the UK government. I can just sit back and just watch all that drama unfold, and it'll save me a lot of money with Netflix. But then you have Germany as well, and Germany is completely deindustrializing. I mean, you hear about the BMW plants moving out of UK, going into China. You heard about the BASF plant moving from Germany, going into China. And this BASF plant is a very important plant, and that produces stuff that the world needs, for example, fertilizer and other chemicals as well. You hear Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes opening up new plants all over China. There's stories about how these German companies are also moving in the United States. But personally, I just do not see the business sense in moving to the United States. Yeah, energy might be cheap, but then you got the cost of, you got the inflation problems, you have the cost of living over there, the wages are high, and it will cost a company 4 or 5 times more expensive to set up in the US compared to China. I don't think that story is true. I think that's what the United States wants to happen, wants to move all the European companies into US. But reality, I don't think that's the case. So my question is, why are these ridiculous leaders allowing all of this to happen? I'm talking about the German leaders. I'm talking about the UK leaders. And let's talk about the Germans first. I mean, these guys, they know who did the they know who blew up the Nord Stream 2. And you have people like Scholz, who sits there like a dummy when Biden stands next to him saying, we're going to shut down Nord Stream. And Scholz just sits there like a dummy, takes it. And they're almost like, how would you say, little poodles, where you can do whatever you want with them and they just don't say anything back. Let's start with Germany. We'll go into UK and the rest of Europe. But, what's going on here, guys? Why are they so oblivious to what's happening to them and how, they are allowing the US to completely ransack their countries? And also, I also want to say that Macron and the German minister recently said that LNG prices are way too high and US is selling it 4 times as much to us compared to what they're selling it at home. Is this a start of them like complaining? I mean, what's going on? I'll start with Brian and we'll move on to Alex.
It was all extremely predictable. Alex Cristoforo from the Duran did a hilarious video where he was talking about France and Macron being surprised. Do you mean sending LNG over the ocean is more expensive than piping it in from existing pipes from Russia? Who could have predicted this? Well, it is extremely predictable, and these people would have to be beyond incompetent for all of this to happen, and them actually trying to improve the condition of the European people in their respective countries. The Germans, for example, this is a country with a very large industrial base. When the United States looks at Germany, Germany with an independent foreign policy is going to work with Russia, and together they will be stronger. It will work with China, and together they will be stronger. And if Germany is working with Russia and China and all together becoming stronger across Eurasia, so will the rest of Europe. They will follow. And this was something that they would not allow. They would rather burn absolutely everything down rather than allow that to happen and usurp U.S. hegemony around the globe. Just think about what they did during the Vietnam War. They killed millions of people to try to stop the nations in Southeast Asia and then beyond that from reasserting their sovereignty. That was post World War II. This was the United States working with former imperial powers, France, the UK, trying to reassert control over these regions around the world. That's what those wars were about. And throughout the process, the U.S. began absorbing these socio-political networks. The EU bureaucracy that was created to supplant national sovereignty across Europe, and it clearly has. And the current German government is doing exactly what would benefit the United States and only the United States. They're doing it at the cost of the German people, their industry, and these are things that are almost irreversible. I mean, this type of damage, you're going to have to start all over again. You're not going to be able to save what you had. You're going to have to build all of that back up on your own again because of the damage that is being done. It's deliberate. I was following the Nord Stream 2 story for years when they were talking about it and then building it, and it was almost tangible how desperately the U.S. was to stop that. They would do almost anything to stop that. And when China was talking about Belt and Road Initiative and having that connect to Europe, the U.S. would do almost anything to stop that. And so they went as far as literally blowing up the pipeline, and they have gone as far as literally physically attacking the infrastructure, rail lines, pipelines of the Belt and Road Initiative. The U.S. doesn't do it, but they are arming and backing separatist groups that are all across Eurasia. It is almost like a world war unfolding asymmetrically. And it is the United States fighting everyone, ally and enemy alike, to try to sustain its hegemony over the planet. It's madness.
Sure. So before we move on to China and Taiwan, Alex, why do these Western leaders have no common sense, first of all? Secondly, I don't remember Chancellor Merkel, caving into the West or the United States. She was pushing back a lot of stuff. She had good relationships with Russia. She had good relationships with the West. Now that she's gone, it seems like Germany's just falling apart. I mean, it goes back to my first question: why are Western leaders? Why do they not have any common sense? I mean, just basic common sense. What's going on around the world?
Well, let's clear up Angela Merkel. This is a lady whose phone was tapped by the U.S. government. So I think she was very careful on what kind of information she did share. But let's be very clear here. You are talking, and if we're focusing on European politics, simply they don't give a shit what you and I think. They don't care.